and we are at the Stradishall camp. It's no longer a camp, of course, but in 1972 this place was home to up to 2,000 of the Ugandan Asians, and they initially came here because it was a holding camp. So they arrived at Stansted Airport, they were put into coaches, and the coaches came up this road and they stopped here and they went into that office there, into that building where they were initially registered. They were given a hot meal in a canteen behind, and then they were allocated to their accommodation. This had been an RAF camp, and if you look here you can see the memorial. Between 1938 and 1970 it was the RAF were here, and obviously it was important in the Second World War. It was vacated in 1970, and so it was open and accessible for the Ugandan Asians to use. There was accommodation for them all over there, the other side of the fence, which is now a prison.
I was 7.5 years old when I could study stall camp. We came late at night, and we were taken into this building and to do all the registration and everything, and then they fed us, and then they took us all to our accommodation. I think it's just temporary accommodation in the main hall, and then next day they put us into all the houses. It looks all familiar, but it's obviously a bit modern right now.
Originally, when they first came to the camp, they shared one converted air hangar that had been changed to adapt and house 3 different families. So the air hangar that they lived in was separated with just wardrobes, so there wasn't a lot of privacy.
Single people had, I don't know, I suppose more dormitory type of allocation in the barracks, whatever they had up there at the time in the 70s. And then we had a sort of voucher system for milk or food or something like that.
The first day we went to the canteen to eat, it was just English food and meat and everything, and that was alien to us. We never seen food like that, and it was impossible for any of us to eat that sort of food. So my mum and a few women approached the manager of the restaurant, of the canteen, and he says, yeah, that's fine, if you can cook Indian food if you want to. And my mum and a few ladies went to Cambridge to a local Indian shop, and they bought all the masala, all the ingredients needed to make Indian food, the vagar. And my mum would do that, and the 6 ladies would chop the onions and potatoes, whatever it was needed, and then my mum would make them the food. So they gave them every day chapatis, rice, sakpat, rotli, all the Indian thali basically, and yeah, we got that every day.
The colours I remember were amazing. Made our sort of traditional English garb look a bit dull and dreary, but it was the total culture difference that I remember most.
He got the school together and they started meeting as a school, and on the Friday before he had 3 staff, a school, no pupils. On the following Monday he had a school, 3 staff, 80 pupils, and the following Friday, 5 days later, he had a school, 3 staff and 1,200 pupils.
I don't remember there being any particular guidance on what we should be teaching them, other than giving them a gist of what being in England was like, and keeping going the sort of general English and maths particularly, because they all seem to be pretty hot at maths.
The weather was a big shock for me, coming in September time and watching the beautiful sun, and then you find out it's very misleading. It isn't sunny and warm out there. It is sunny, but it's not warm. So first time I managed to catch the cold, so I had to use the medical services of the Stradishall in there.
It was that big impression of driving past the base and just seeing so many displaced people out there with, lost. They looked lost, and they were lost, weren't they, at the end of the day? And yeah, that stayed with me anyhow, and I know it has probably a lot of other people as well. It's something you hope you never see again, but as we all know, the world is moving on and things are happening again.
I think the support we got to integrate, the support from people our own age, and the neighbours was terrific. You know, history is important, you know, reflecting on how small acts of kindness, which are in your gift, can make a big difference to other people's lives, and they can then generate benefits to even more people. You know, I'd like to think I've taught so many doctors and nurses and other operating department people in this country as well as abroad, and if I'd not had the opportunity or the support to come here, if my family hadn't been given a furnished house by the Peterborough Council to settle down, I wouldn't be there, and I might not have helped that little kid who was going up and down in my drive. So there are consequences to everything we do, good consequences, and you need to remember that. And I think so that when it happens, as is, you know, Ukraine's another new example of what's happening, you'll realise that there are, if it's in your gift, helping other people will be beneficial to so many more people than just that one person.
But frankly, Britain has to take some responsibility for what it created in Amin. And it took some responsibility by taking the Ugandan Asians. But let's also be honest that Britain didn't open its arms to us and say, immediately come in, okay? It took public pressure to get them to take us in. So yeah, they did the right thing in the end, but Britain's involvement in Uganda has a dirty history.
So we're at Tonvanai in North Wales. There was an army camp here from about 1938. You have to imagine this whole area was covered in admin buildings, accommodation blocks. There was a cinema, there was a hospital, there were shops. And then after the war, it was out of use for a very long period. In 1972, it was used as emergency accommodation for around 800 Ugandan Asians who arrived in the middle of the night. It was raining, it was late September, and they arrived at that railway station right there. There's around 800 altogether. They were all taken then into the building you can see over there. That was an office block where they were induced into the camp. They had to give their names and their details and so on. Then they were, those orange buildings with the orange roof, that was accommodation. A number of them were there. If you look at over here, all that's left of it is that small piece of metal, but that used to be a barrier coming over the road. You can see that the road is tarred. All along the side here are foundations of buildings, and if you look in the distance, there are ruins of what used to be the admin block for the camp. So it's a very atmospheric spot, especially on a day like this when it's so peaceful and sunny. The only other thing to show you is that house there. It was commandeered and it was used by the officer in charge of the whole camp as his personal accommodation, because it was the most comfortable in the area, so he had the use of that. It was auctioned up for sale, and the Ministry of Defence was able to buy it for the use of the Commandant.
When they arrived, they must have wondered where they were coming to, as we already know. Tonvanai was a long way away from anywhere. The poor things, when they came off the train and from off the buses that had brought them from London, they were very bedraggled and very tired and frightened. I would put some of them were frightened as to wondering where they landed.
I remember that when they arrived, there was a lot of talk about how scared some of the Asians were coming off the train, just because some of the soldiers were there because they'd been clearing up the camp, making it ready for the Asians, and therefore they were on the platform to help them off the train and to get their belongings off. Not that they had that many belongings, I don't mean that. And how frightened they were of seeing these soldiers, because they were thinking of what they just left, And after all, it had been a traumatic journey to get there. And to then see soldiers again, I think must have frightened them a lot.
One of them showed us suitcases when we went down to the camp where they'd stripped the lining out and put the money behind to get it out, and in old coats as well, down the sleeves. You know, so, but it was very distressing for them that they lost their livelihoods.
There was second load of Asian people coming to Wales, and I was a friend of mine, and we went to as a volunteer to receive them, you know. And who do I see? But one of my best friend coming, getting off that train, you know. And I tell you what, that was the biggest joyous moment in my life, you know, when I saw him, you know. We hugged.
My mother became ill and became very ill. She had rheumatic fever. Heart was affected, joints were swollen, etc. And so my sister and I went to the medical center and said that because my mother couldn't go to the medical center, she couldn't walk because Tontvanai camp is very hilly. You've got to go climb a hill to go to the medical center. And the nurse said to my sister and I that it was raining a bit then, and she said, "It rains here all the time, and just because it rains, you can't turn around and say she can't come here. You've got to bring her here, otherwise no one's going to come there and see her." And we went home and told my mum that they won't come, and we've got to walk over. And then we walked, my sister and I and my mother. And you know, my mother, you can imagine, with rheumatic fever, with the acute infection, with the heart, you know, cardiac sort of affected, and walking, and my mother would walk a few steps and then stop and sit down, and walk a few steps and sit down. And then a milk van passed by, and then he stopped and he said, "Shall I take you?" And we said, "Yeah." And then he took, of course, my mum to the medical center. And of course, as soon as the doctor examined her, he said, "No, you can't go home. You've got to be admitted now." She survived. She did live, but you know, she never quite recovered.
I come from the Caribbean. I'm an Indian, same as those people are. We were sent there, you know, indentured labour. It was the same as they were sent to Africa, should you imagine. So we've always been a race that goes wherever we go. We try to make our community better, you know. And it's the reason I'm a counsellor. If you move into the community, you've got to make it better. Try, at least try.
Put it this way, I was in a position where I could help people. And it's nice to be able to help people. And I felt great. And when they actually left, it was some sad goodbyes, because you made some very good friends.
If I had only lived my life in Uganda, I cannot see that I would have had those opportunities in Uganda, because most people, if I look back and remember women in their 20s, were married very young and had children and had their own families. At the maximum, the role models I saw of women were they worked in primary school as school teachers. There was an Indian nurse who was a woman in our town, but I never saw women in any professional positions. And I think the advantage of coming to this country is that as a woman, it gave me wings so that I can never stop flying.